Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me, Jeff, Gaurav, Ryan. Really nice to see so many people. I was remarking earlier that before tonight, I've only ever been in a room with one person who's used Emacs before, so there are like 10 of us here. I'm now 11, something like that, if I did math correctly, which is more than one other person. So nice to see so many Emacs people and meet new people. I'd love to be in touch with you after this, get to know you better. If anything that I said interests you, want to know more, I left something out, I'll have my contact information at the end. Would really love to be in touch about anything. Just a little bit about me to start. I recently moved to the Bay Area. I'm living in South San Francisco, starting a monastery out here. So I've done about 2.5 years total of monastic training, been meditating for about 7 years now. And we have a established monastery in Vermont, but we're starting a new one in the Bay Area. Our goal is to have 500 monasteries built at a certain point, and so this is our second one. We'll be doubling every 5 years. So you know about exponential growth. We're going from 1 to 2, and in 5 years we'll go to 4 and 8 and so on. So if you're interested in that, I'd love to tell you more about that as well. Yeah, and I sort of stumbled into using Emacs about coming up on 5 years ago. I have a liberal arts degree, had no real occasion to do programming in my formal education, and sort of stumbled into using it through an indirect route and fell in love, and it's been a weird hobby for me ever since then. That's why it's so exciting to have people in the room to talk to about it. Yeah, in a weird way, it's not unrelated to what I'm doing at the monastery. We talk about integrating wisdom, love, and power. So the basic problem with human civilization that we see is that the people who have power tend to lack wisdom and love, and the people who have wisdom and love tend to lack power. So Emacs is a very strange, peculiar, unique, extraordinary form of power, a very specific form of power, but it is a form of power. And I like to think I have a little bit of wisdom and love, and so it's good for me to have that power. It's good for us to share wisdom and love and power together. So it might seem like Emacs and my day job are unrelated, but to me, it's part of a weird journey that I'm on. So would love to talk to you more about that. Also, Tasshin is my Dharma name that I received earlier this year, actually. Took vows with Shinzen Young and my teacher, Soryu Foral, and received that name. So you can call me Tasshin or Michael or anything else you like. They're both good. Today I'll be talking about building a second brain. This is something that I've learned about over the last year or so, and excited to share it with you. It is the work of a gentleman named Tiago Forte, who is sort of like the contemporary David Allen. If you're familiar with Getting Things Done, which many org mode users are, David Allen created GTD, Getting Things Done, and Tiago has created Building a Second Brain, which is sort of an extension of Getting Things Done. It takes Getting Things Done and runs with it into the sort of digital era. And so naturally, my question was, can I do it in Emacs? It's a really incredible system that he's built, both practical tools for how to do things, and also sort of a high-level philosophy of how to do things, and I wanted to implement that in Emacs. So this is sort of what I've discovered about that through that process. So you'll learn a little bit about building a second brain, although not too much from this talk, just a taste of it. You'll learn a little bit about my experience configuring Emacs and org mode for that, although again, just a taste. If you want more, there's my configurations available online. That'll also be in the notes and such. so you can look into the details more, but it's a little bit of everything that I've discovered with this. So yeah, primarily building a second brain is concerned with the problem of reference materials. This is something that's addressed in getting things done, but primarily David Allen, I believe, when he originally implemented it, was doing things with paper and folders and file cabinets, which of course works very well, but we live in the digital age, and so how to store files and notes in a way that makes sense was not a solved problem for me, at least, until I did building a second brain. So you can have the best tools in the world, like Emacs and org mode, and still have a mess. Many of you probably have a mess in your files, lots of org mode files, lots of different files in different places. You have trouble finding things, trouble remembering things, even though you have a great system for keeping track of your tasks. Maybe the bit about notes and files and where ideas come from is messy. And so this sort of took the same principles of getting things done and extended it. So that's sort of what before building a second brain looked like for me. Of course, I had a clean desktop and a clean downloads folder, but actually my org mode stuff was not that different from that. I had maybe, welcome, maybe 20, 30 different files, some of which were unused or just sort of placeholders. Could never remember which things were in which places. And in the files that I did use regularly, they're sort of like headings within headings within headings within headings. Again, some of the headings were used, some of the headings weren't used. As a consequence of that, specifically for Emacs, I found that my files were quite long and that Emacs Lisp functions tend to not work very performatively on them. So I didn't have the, it was sort of like doing something like org refile, which should be very basic in org mode, you know, moving a header from one place to another. It was slow enough for me that I could definitely do it, but that I didn't do it in practice because it was just kind of annoying. I've certainly spoken with people who just don't use org refile because they can't use it. It's not that it was annoying, they actually can't use it. So this actually, I mean, I'm sure that there are technical reasons for that it's slow and could be improved or something, but I think fundamentally it's the problem that people are having is having lots of files with way too many things in them that it's hard to figure out where to go. So for me, building a second brain, the things that I'll be talking a little bit about tonight made it look like this. This is what my experience using org mode is like now. I have about 5, 6, 7 org mode files that I use on a regular basis. There's really only one that I use that's my tasks file. And the others, there's an inbox where things go in and a few other ones that are sort of more like traditional GTD lists, like someday maybe, goals, things like that. But it's really quite simple. I don't know the exact number of lines in them, but practically speaking, org refile is very quick now. It's a joy to use. It actually works. I always know which files things are in, and yeah, it works very great. Just as a practical example of this, I just came off of retreat. We do a silent meditation retreat each month for a week, and at the end of it, a whole host of tasks to be done, new emails, new projects, all kinds of things to take care of. Had about, I'd say, it's not unusual for me to have on the order of 20, 25, 30, 50 new tasks after a retreat, maybe 1, 2, 3 new projects. And that was just a breeze to deal with this morning. Just went through and this goes here, this goes there, add this, do this. I did not have that skill before implementing all of this. Of course, some of that was my sort of stock GTD system got better just through refining things. So actually quite a lot of what I'll talk about is GTD, but there are some things that come specifically from building a second brain, and that whole system has been extremely useful to me. So again, you'll get a little taste of that But this is sort of the why, going from this to this, metaphorically speaking. So these are a few of the things that I'll cover tonight, questions that I'll touch on. There's sort of 5 different general fields that we'll just get into a little bit. There's Emacs and org mode, which many of you are familiar with. Getting things done, which some of you will be familiar with. Building a second brain, which I assume few, if none of you are familiar with. And then Evernote, which my reaction to a year ago was yuck. Why would I use that? But I actually use extensively now. And so I'll talk a little bit about that and why I use Evernote now. But there'll be quite a bit about Emacs, where I use a lot of things, and sort of how all of these different tools and philosophies relate to each other. We'll touch a little bit on this. So. Okay, so just a little bit here about building a second brain. These are sort of the 3 pillars of building a second brain. There's 3 parts: capturing, organizing, and sharing. And for each of those, there's 3 tools that are offered: progressive summarization, para, and just-in-time project management, or workflow strategies. Each of these tools are extremely useful. Implementing them has made me much more effective at not only getting things done, but getting beautiful things done, having interesting, creative ideas. Like pulling together this presentation, for example, was quite easy for me. I don't know how much time I spent on it. I didn't clock it, but it was really easy to pull this together. I just grabbed a few things from different places that I knew where they all were, and a presentation that hopefully you'll find to be compelling came together quite nicely without much stress on my part. So each of those things is discussed in building a second brain proper. I'll really only touch on the second one, para, tonight, but know that there are 2 other tools that I won't even get into that are really cool. But para is the one that I've had most occasion to interact with from an Emacs perspective. So that's why I'll be sharing that. Oh, and I should mention also, full disclosure, that I work with Tiago, the creator of Forte Labs and Building a Second Brain. Really great guy, very interesting person, wonderful to work with. And there will be, at the end of the talk, I have a discount code for his course if you'd like to take it. It's 25% off of the course. It's actually on the thing over there if you'd like to use it. But I'm not getting paid to be here tonight, and I'm not going to see anything if you use the discount code. I probably could have asked for that, but it's just didn't want to go there. So in any case, I work with Tiago, but I'm not directly benefiting from this. I just really love his stuff and wanted to share it with you. So again, this is sort of a extension to getting things done. Some of you will be familiar with GTD. The heart of GTD that most people implement has to do with tasks. It does actually talk about reference systems, but not extensively. And so building a second brain addresses that with, again, 3 things: progressive summarization, para, and just-in-time project management. Progressive summarization makes it much easier to review your old notes quickly and make them better over time. So for example, I can look at notes on a book that I read a year ago and very quickly, on the order of 30 seconds, remember everything that I need to remember about it. It's extremely useful. I read quite a bit, come across lots of different articles, watch different talks. Maybe you're taking notes on this talk tonight, and 6 months from now, this will become more relevant. You'll want to know very quickly, what was the thing that was actually interesting to me that Tasshin said? Or you'll think of a book that you read in college. How will you quickly find the passage that really inspired you? So progressive summarization is a tool for that. Para, again, that's the one that I'll talk about the most, is storing or organizing notes and files so that you can easily find them. So this is for that problem where you know that you have something, but you don't remember exactly where you put it. Para solves that so that you always know where the thing is, whatever it is, whether it's a file or a note or a video, it's just always in the right place with Para. So that's extremely useful. That solves the sort of more literal-minded version of the problem that I showed earlier with the desktop, the messy desktop. Although, of course, this applies to things like notes that might be in an org mode header as well. Where is that note or that file or anything like that? How do I find it? And just-in-time project management is, or where the workflow strategies are about creating things with the notes that you capture and organize. How do I quickly pull together a presentation, even though I only have maybe 20 to 30 minutes a day for a few weeks to work on it because I'm living at a monastery? How do I very quickly pull together a presentation that will actually make sense and be compelling? Just-in-time project management is about how you actually do things with the notes that you're taking. So some of you might be familiar with this left diagram, which I've adapted in the right form. This is the workflow diagram for getting things done, GTD. I won't go into too much detail about this because that's outside of the scope of this talk. If you're not familiar with it, definitely recommend learning getting things done. It's extremely useful. It's a little bit, it reminds me a little bit of driving a manual car, which I learned to do. Quick aside, I learned to drive 3 times. I learned to drive once as a teenager in a sort of a manual, automatic car, and then second time in a manual, and then third time learning to drive a manual car, but for fuel economy. And so each time there's sort of a new level of being complicated that comes into it. And so when I look at that, it reminds me of that because I imagine if someone's never seen it, oh, it looks very complicated. But of course now, having implemented it over many years, it's quite smooth. And this is just how you do things if you actually want to do what you said you would do. So again, GTD is about you take this stuff, whether it's a task or a note or a something, and where do I put it? What do I do with it? You go through that diagram and all will be well. That's the promise. On the right is how I actually do this. So I've sort of overlaid on each of the things what I use with the different tool that I use. So the unicorn, as some of you will know, is the org mode icon. The calendar is Google Calendar, and then I use Evernote for project plans and reference. So this is what I call the minimal approach to building a second brain in Emacs and org mode, where you use org mode for certain things, namely projects, someday maybe, waiting, and next actions. You'll see that's where the unicorn is. Those are all the things having to do with tasks and projects. Those go in org mode. I keep all of my tasks, all of my actions in org mode. It works quite well for that because I can schedule things, I can clock things, can arrange them. So I play to org mode strengths and keep my tasks there. However, when it comes to notes, which are the project plans and reference, I find that another tool, Evernote in this case, although you could certainly use another tool, is better suited to that. Now there is another approach, which I call the maximal approach, which is just to do everything in Emacs and org mode. That was originally what I wanted to do when I started this whole project, was do everything in Emacs and org mode. I'm sure some of you will sympathize with that. I know several people who are doing that, who like it, who have found ways to do it. It's certainly possible. It's just not the way that I've chosen to do it. I prefer to use Evernote as well, although you could use another notes program. So just a little bit about that, about the pros and cons of that. Most of you, again, will have a sense of why you might want to do everything in Emacs. Things go better when you do it all in Emacs. Everything talks to everything, and you can program everything, and it's just this utopia of joy and bliss. I've certainly done everything in Emacs before. It's quite fun. It's quite interesting. There are some cons, though, to this in particular. One that I think we tend to overlook is how much configuration goes into that, how much you have to spend time making this work with that and configuring this. That can be a pain. But there are sort of more practical concerns as well, not just losing your time to that, because for me, it's fun to configure all of these things. So I don't really mind that. That's not actually a con for me. But there are practical concerns, which is that sort of ease of use. And I don't mean in terms of understanding how it works. I mean, can you quickly take a note when you need to, when you want to take a note, say you're coming out of a medical appointment or something, can you very quickly take the note that has the information you need? The whole goal of the system is to make it really easy to capture a note, store it in the right place, and then use it at the right time for the right thing. And in my experience, in my own judgment, Emacs isn't that great for that. So I've decided not to use it for that. The reasons are a few. One is mobile. There is a quite good mobile system with, I'm using Bjorg now on my iPhone and iPad. I like that quite a lot. I'm under the impression that there are similar tools for Android that work well. Still, Bjorg, which I do use, is it's getting more involved, but it's mainly focusing on reading your org mode files. You can do quite a bit of editing. I'm actually really impressed with how much editing the author of Bjorg has pulled off, but I mostly use Bjorg for either reading files or quick capture of tasks, things like that. So I can pull out my phone and capture a task. But there's also things that plain text just isn't that great for. One is images. You can configure Emacs so you can just drag and drop images in. That's nice, but it's still, one, you have to configure it, and two, even when you do configure it, it's sort of annoying in the way that it's implemented, at least that I found, sort of a banal detail. But basically, you want it to be really easy to drag and drop images or add in screenshots. And then also, of course, this is the real one that really gets to me, is rich text. A lot of building a second brain depends on formatting text with bolding and highlighting and things like that. Emacs can do those things, but it's really not made for it. It doesn't look that good. It doesn't work that well. It's not that smooth. So it's not well suited that. And the other one also is sharing. So it's not that easy if someone doesn't use org mode or Emacs to share your notes with them so that they will be able to use the notes as well. This is actually also on the improvement. There's something called Neat Draft that I'm quite excited about. Has anyone heard of that? It's sort of in stealthy beta alpha something, but it sort of promises to be something like a Google Docs for org mode files, where you can share an org mode file very easily, and then someone who doesn't know how to use Emacs or org mode can not only read but edit the thing. And so they have like a playground available that you can try that's quite nice, but it's also not there yet. And even when it gets to where it wants to be, it won't be quite what I was looking for. So I decided to do this minimal approach where I outsource my notes to Evernote. And that gets me things like an app on my iPhone and my iPad, rich text formatting, sharing, really easy to add in screenshots or voice memos, just all of that out of the box. There are, of course, cons there. I ended up paying for the plan for Evernote, which I don't mind doing, but not everyone wants to pay money for it. There's a free one, of course, but not everyone uses Evernote, so that can pose difficulties as well. But it's a trade-off like all things. And so for myself, I decided, again, to do all of my tasks in Emacs and org mode, and then all of my reference materials, my notes, in Evernote. Now, I do still take notes in org mode, where I can type fast. If I'm in a meeting where I have to type very fast, I will take the notes in org mode and then export them to Evernote. So that is the one thing related to notes that I do in org mode. So again, I do know people who are doing the all Emacs approach. They like it. They've made it work. It can be done. I could tell you how it would be done, but that's not the approach that I myself use. So as I said earlier, the particular tool within building a second brain that I will talk about the most is Para. This is the one that my Emacs sort of interacts with the most. So wanted to share how I pulled that off with you. Para, again, is about how you organize everything, whether it's a note or a file or some video or whatever it is. Para is how you put it in the right place so that you always know where it is. And so everything boils down to these four categories: projects, areas, resources, and archives. Projects and areas you'll be familiar with perhaps from getting things done. Something, I'll just give a few examples of a project would be something like, for me, giving this presentation as a project. There are multiple tasks associated with it. So, and it has like a deadline. It's sort of time bound to tonight. And I'll be done with it and then archive it tomorrow probably. So that's the archives category. It's everything that's old. Areas are more ongoing. So these are things like responsibilities that you have on an ongoing basis. So things like taking care of a car or an aspect of your job or money or taking care of your house or something like that. Things that aren't going to go away anytime soon, although they do tend to go away over time, but they do change, but not as frequently. They're ongoing, and they're, rather than a deadline or an outcome, they have a standard to be maintained. So something that you want to rise to. Resources are things that are interests. So for me, Emacs is a resource. I'm interested in Emacs. It's not particularly relevant to my day job or the things that I'm actively working on, but if I read an interesting article about Emacs, I'll want to file that away and remember it so that when it becomes relevant later, I can use it. So those are sort of like interests. Now, Para is something that you implement in a lot of different places. You implement it in your task manager. You implement it in every place that you store files. You implement it in places that you store notes. And sort of you use the same methodology in all of those places. So you create, practically what this looks like in Emacs, for example, is that there are 4 headers, one for one projects, 2 areas, 3 resources, and 4 archives. And then everything goes into those. They're filed into a particular project or area or resource. Although in tasks, you don't keep track of resources because there aren't tasks associated with your interests. If there was, then it would be a project or an area. But anyway, so in practice, I interact with this system quite a bit from my Emacs configuration. I'll just put this up for a second as well. This is sort of the definition of what I was just saying. And also, I'll just add that if you'd like a more thorough explanation of what this is or why you'd use it or how to actually implement it, the course or Tiago's articles, or he has a book forthcoming, will be a better way to learn about that. What it actually is and how to do it, but this is just a taste of it. And I'll be sharing my notes, or I shared them with Jeff, and he'll be distributing them so you can see this later on. So now we'll get a little bit into the Emacs end of this. Practically speaking, I have about 5 org mode files. This is just the way that I've found myself doing it. The first is the inbox. Those are where things are filed either from my laptop with capture templates or from my iPhone or my iPad with Bjork. And those are all synced. All of these are synced with Dropbox. So that's where things start, the stuff in the GTD diagram. And then if it's a task, it gets filed into this todo.org file. Just a standard list of tasks, although again, it's organized into projects and areas. So the same system of para applies there, where there's a logical structure of where things go. So I have a separate list for someday maybe, separate list for agendas, and another list for goals. Those are sort of standard vanilla lists that you would keep in a good GTD system. So all of the next actions are in todo.org, and then the other things that I need to keep track of that are sort of like tasks or goals go into specific files for those purposes. So that's 5 files, which is quite a bit better than I was at before I started this whole project, which was, again, something like 15 or 20 different files across different parts of my file structure. Didn't make very much sense. This is quite simple, and I always know where things go. So now I'll give a few demos of the Emacs things, of what this looks like. I think there's 3 or 4 demos that I'll just give you a brief taste of. So this is what my capture template screen looks like. There's these different kinds of things. And I'll be showing off 1 or 2 of these. There's a task, a project, a goal, someday or maybe, and then I can walk through daily, weekly, or monthly reviews. The annual reviews I don't do in Emacs. I do those in Evernote. So the one that I want to show you, though, is the project capture template. So let's see. This was the most involved one because I use quite a bit of these different capture expansion template key breadcrumbs, or whatever they're called, where it asks me for different things. So so when I start a new project, maybe it's to clean the garage, it asks me for a project name. Then it'll ask me for a deadline. I need to have it done in 2 months. I want my garage to be clean. That's an outcome. An area is maybe my house. And then I have sort of a standard checklist of things to go through. So let's see, clean the garage. Okay, so this gets inserted into the one projects header that I can use, just narrow to that now. And it's sort of, these are all of the things that I do when I start a new project. They're just inserted as a checklist for me. And it's really quite nice because I can include Emacs lists. So this is the killer feature that I, as an Emacs user building this system, have that, as far as I can tell, no one else in this whole building a second brain sphere has, which is automatically creating folders. When you start using Para, you will end up creating a lot of different folders in different places, and maybe an Evernote notebook. Because I'm starting this adventure in Emacs, I can have it automatically pick out the heading title. That'll pick out clean the garage, and then make a directory in my Dropbox, or I have 2 different Google Drive instances, one for myself and one for my job. And so it can create folders with the appropriate names in those locations. And it can also do the same with an Evernote notebook, because Evernote has exposed itself to AppleScript so that you can tell it, okay, this is the name of the headline, and go create a notebook with that name. So this means I can move through the whole process of creating a project not only quite quickly, but quite consistently. So in practice, it's very easy to make projects, which means I actually do create projects, which means the system gets maintained, and it gets maintained well. So it's really nice to do that from Emacs because it's programmable. So again, it was sort of asking me for some text for a date. It also automatically plugged in what the start date was. You'll notice I only supplied it with a date once, but I have it track the start date automatically. All of that is just done for me. I can use the org mode capture breadcrumb things. I forget the exact term, but they're quite nice. They're really nice to use. And also, this is another thing that you can read them all from a file. So originally, actually the very first Emacs Lisp that I ever wrote was a capture template, and it was like 1 or 2 lines of what the thing actually was, and it just prompted for a heading, sort of the equivalent of asking for clean the garage. But I didn't know about all of these other breadcrumbs that you could ask for, and then I also didn't know that instead of it just being 1 line in the set queue org capture templates thing, it could actually be a file. So you can say, grab this file from that place and have it be the whole capture template. So as you can see, this is a really long capture template where there's a lot of things that I want to do every time I start a new project. You can just tell it, grab this file that has all that stuff, and that doesn't need to be in your configuration. So it's just 1 line in my configuration. Grab the file for starting new projects from the templates folder. Let's see. Oh yeah, so another thing that's really nice is that at any given time, I can quickly get a list of what my projects and areas are. So for this, I used a feature called, I believe, column view in org mode. Also something that I hadn't been exposed to before, but it's really quite nice. It means that you can get a specific view on a certain part of your org mode file that looks like, sort of like a spreadsheet, but in your Emacs and org mode folder. So this is really nice for, and particularly I use it at my weekly and monthly reviews. When I get to my weekly or monthly review, I'll check, oh, what projects do I have? What areas do I have? That's for the weekly and monthly reviews, respectively. Let me just show you what this looks like. So this is actually all possible because I have this structure where I just have projects and areas, and it knows how they where they are and what they look like. So this is a property that's set in both the projects and areas header, where I say what I want the column view to show. So in the case of projects, I want to show what priority is, what its name is, what area it's associated with, when it's due by, and then also what the outcome is. So that looks like this. Where I can just sort of get a nice list with all of those properties exposed in a certain way. So that's nice for the weekly reviews, and then for the monthly review, I'll do this areas overview. It's a little bit shorter. It just has the names of the things, because those don't have deadlines or outcomes associated with them. So I just want to get a nice quick view of that. And again, that's sort of set in this properties columns tag. The next one is stuck projects. This is a feature that comes out of the box with org mode, but by default isn't very useful. This is from the org mode manual. It says, if you're following a system like GT, you need to make sure that all of your projects are moving along. A stuck project is one that has no tasks, next actions with it, so it won't show up in your to-do list, which means things won't happen for it, so the project won't happen. So in the weekly review, I check for these things. Are there any projects that don't have tasks? What do I need to move forward with them? Now, by default, org mode doesn't know what you define a project to be. So for me, it was an extremely messy, noisy, loud list when I ran it of just lots of different headers that didn't have next actions under them. Now there is a way to customize this in org mode so that it's more useful, but I haven't used that way because in my tasks folder, all of the headings that are sort of second level headings in the one projects heading are projects. There's sort of a more semantic meaning to the file than adding a tag or saying, it's these things. And so this is sort of what it looked like before is, lots of different things. You'll see that some of those are in the to-do, some of those are in agendas, some of those are in someday maybe. None of those actually are projects that are stuck. Now, when I run it, it looks like this, that there's one stuck project. This project has no next actions associated with it. Tasshin, you should do something about that. It's a quite clear and loud message. We can actually run it now to see what happens. So this is the default one. And then, now I have this clean the garage one that we just started as a joke that also has no next tasks associated with it. So org mode doesn't know how we're going to clean the garage, so it's not likely to happen at this point. At the weekly review, I would be like, oh yes, I need to go to the dump to get new storage containers. Or I don't know what you need to do for cleaning the garage, but so in any case, that's a lot less noisy now because of the way that I've configured the file so that there's a built-in semantic meaning. This is what a project is. Now, the regular reviews, this is also really nice. This I find is the thing that makes or breaks people's GTD system, is whether they're doing the reviews or not. It's sort of something that you have to build a habit around. You have to know how to do it. Org mode and building a second brain, this configuration has made it a lot easier for me to do that. So this, again, we got a little taste of this earlier, but is a killer Emacs combo of combining org mode capture templates, the files, and executable Lisp source blocks. So this works really well for the weekly review and the other things. And just a quick note too, I find that these are named pretty poorly and that they have chronological names, daily review, weekly review, monthly review, annual review, but I don't actually perform them on that schedule. And I think this is why people have trouble implementing them actually, is they think I need to do this every week. Now, roughly you need to do it about every week, but in practice it might mean that it's 10 days or 4 days or 3 days for a weekly review. For a monthly review, it might be every month, it might be 2 months, it might be 2 weeks. It's when you need reorientation at different levels. So this is the daily review you do when you need reorientation at a task level. For the weekly review, that's really about reorienting your projects. Again, are any of them stuck or not? Are there any new projects I've not captured yet? The monthly review is about your goals, and the annual is about your vision. So when I moved out here, when I decided that I was going to be moving out here, I did a new annual review, even though it had only been 4 months since my last annual review, because my vision for the world had completely changed of my life. Oh, I'm going to be living in the Bay Area rather than Vermont. And of course, many other details, but that's the most concrete one. This just looks different, so I need to do a reorientation here. So knowing both why those reviews exist and having a really easy way for me to do them regularly in Emacs means that they actually get done, which means the whole system actually works. So again, this sort of comes from the capability of capture templates to be stored from a file. So that's what it looks like in the last line there, where rather than an actual template right there in the Lisp, you can just say, hey, grab this file and insert this into my reviews file or something. So these templates can be quite long, and it's really nice that you can just put them in a file that you can update and change regularly. So this is an excerpt from the org mode manual that has the different breadcrumbs or escapes that I used. It's worth looking over all those lists. The ones that I used earlier are the 2 different forms of timestamps, active and inactive. I used 2 different kinds of prompts, one that was just for a string and then one that was inserted as a property. I think there's a couple of others, but it's worth looking through that because a lot of things become possible that are sort of programmed into org mode. You know, like the clipboard, you could see that that would be really useful to just automatically insert the clipboard every time you run a particular capture template. Let's see. See if I'm missing anything. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, why don't I just show you real quick what these reviews look like. That's a Hydra at the bottom that says, do I want to get a daily review, a monthly review, or a weekly review? So I can just say CCR and then DM or W, and then I'll get one of those. So in this case, I sort of quickly inserted a daily review. And again, those take full advantage of Emacs Lisp code blocks where I can just say, okay, I want to look in my downloads folder with Dured, or I actually want to look at image Dured for my desktop of what screenshots are in my desktop right now. All kinds of other things. You know, I can check my email, I can run my agenda, and I do them in this particular order where it makes sense to clear my desktop before I clear my downloads folder, before I check my email inboxes, and then the last things that I do are schedule and refile the tasks in my inbox and schedule them for that day. So Emacs is a really, really nice place to implement systems or checklists, whatever you want to call them, because everything's programmable. So that's one of the most useful things to me that's made this whole review habit possible and effective and consistent for me. So there's a few packages that I wanted to point out that I found along the way that have been useful to me in implementing this. First one is org-gcal, which simply syncs your Google Calendar with org mode. I mostly use that to read my Google Calendar. You can write events to Google Calendar from org mode with that, but I've never used that and don't really want to. I prefer using the graphical interface to enter my calendar events, but it's really nice to be able to know. I mean, some of you might have seen that I had dinner with Jeff earlier tonight. That's in my calendar in Emacs without me having to put that in there. I can just see that. It's really nice for those reviews that, you know, every week I can say, oh yeah, is there any tasks that came up from that dinner with Jeff that I need to follow up on? Org clip link, if you have a link in your clipboard to a website, then it will insert that in an org mode format, which means not only that it'll show up as a hyperlink, but also that it goes out and grabs the title from the page. So if you put in google.com, it'll show you Google as the header for it. So that's really nice when you're taking notes and you want to have websites in there. It's more readable. As I said, I will often take notes in org mode and then export them into Evernote, where I want to type this really long thing very quickly, move things around, reformat it with all of the cool things that Emacs gives you, which Evernote doesn't really have, except as exposed through the operating system. You know, some things like go to the beginning of the line or the end of the line, but none of the really cool things that are particular to my configuration. So Oxclip lets you take an org mode section of an org mode file or buffer, and then it exports that as formatted HTML content that you can copy into Google Docs or Evernote or other things that are more for formatted text that other people will use. Lastly, there's this org random note package. I actually wrote that. There's a really cool idea that Tiago has in building a second brain, which is, okay, so you've got all of these notes now that are really useful and interesting. How do you make sure that they'll come up over time? Part of that is through having good systems for keeping track of your projects and so on. But sometimes you want a bit of randomness, of serendipity. And so randomly showing you a note is a useful thing to do. So I wrote a package that lets you do that in org mode. I don't actually really use it myself because, as I say, I don't keep my notes in org mode. But if you decide to take the maximal approach, you might want to use that package. So it's there for you to use. Also, a few points. These are in the notes that will be sent out. But if you want to learn more about these things, there's Building a Second Brain, which is an online course that talks in much more detail about all of these things and more. There's also a membership blog, Praxis, that you can subscribe to that's maybe a bit more affordable. Has also content on a lot of other things. There's 2 posts that I wrote that sort of expands on everything I've said tonight in more detail, although it's a little out of date. Building a second brain in Emacs and org mode and implementing a second brain in Emacs and org. There are links to those. For the GTD templates that I mentioned, I have a gist on GitHub with those so that you can try them at home and adapt them yourself. There are things that are sort of particular to my use that you might not want. You might want to add different things, but you can kind of see what my templates look like there. I also have my configuration online, and so you can see particular parts that I referenced. How does that actually work? What does the code that makes that happen look like? That's available. Also, my contact information, if you'd like to be in touch, love to hear from you. If you're on any of those places, on the emails or the Twitters or the Mastodons, you can be in touch with me. Love to hear from you. And I also have, as I mentioned, a coupon code. If you do decide to take the course, it's on the whiteboard over there. Feel free to use that. That'll get you 25% off the course. So yeah, that's all I've got. I hope that was interesting, and thanks for your time, and hope to hear from you what you think about it.
Yeah. Thank you. We must have lots of questions, right?
Another question. So, case study. I came to the meetup, I took some notes based on your talk. Like, where would I file this in the system?
Yep. I imagine that you'd probably file it. Well, first, you'd put it in whatever you used for notes. So again, that might be org mode, and it might be something like Evernote, org mode, yep. So you'd be taking the maximal approach. And that would probably go into either areas or resources. It depends sort of how you view it. For me, it might be a bit more of like a resource because I don't have active responsibilities related to Emacs, but maybe, for example, you're a programmer, and so maintaining your Emacs is an ongoing part of your responsibility. And so having a note related to that would go into an area. Maybe you'd even start up a project after tonight that's like implement building a second brain in Emacs and org mode. And so then the note would go there. And this is actually a really important feature of Para, which is it's designed to be note first, so that the notes, you understand that the note will move around over time. So today it might be an area, tomorrow it might be a project. Maybe you read more about this, take the course, and decide, okay, I'm really going to go do this, and that becomes a whole project with lots of different things for you to do. And then you complete the project, it moves into archives, but then a year later you want to write an email to me about how you took this and did it completely differently, so that note comes back as a project, and so on. All these notes will be moving through all 4 of them over time. So hypothetically, it could go anywhere. It just depends where you're at and what. But it's not relative, but it's relative to you where you are right now. There is a correct answer, but it's for you right now, and I'm not you, so I won't know which one it is for you. But
Okay, that's a follow-up question. So, what's the easy way to move that note?
Oh yeah. Well, so in the minimal approach for me, in Evernote, that'll be something like there's a shortcut to just move it from one notebook to another. But in org mode, the people that do it all in org mode, what they do is they have and I have this too, but just a file structure for Para on their documents folder or whatever, what have you. And so you'd move the file from, area Emacs to project, implement, building a second brain in Emacs as a file, as a folder in your file structure. So it doesn't create any new tools for storing these things. It's more of a framework of where things go that you implement in your file structures and your different tools.
I think the idea of moving things around is really great. I try to do it a lot because sometimes tasks will get promoted to projects or I have to split things up. But most of the time I'm stuck when I need to do cross-referencing. So say at work, I maintain a few libraries which I do code review for other teams. Some of them might get promoted to a project. So there's a lot of things that are scattered around because I might have a project hierarchy, I might have a daily reporting hierarchy for my bosses. But then at the core, they all are based around these few libraries that I created and now maintain across different slices of my responsibilities. I'm not sure how this system or a good org mode system would be well working for that. I try to use tags, but it feels like it's just something bolted on after the fact, and it doesn't really integrate with the actual workflow when I want to be in the look at a certain view of what my overall responsibilities are.
Definitely. Well, there's a lot there. A few points come to mind. One is I really like and trust your intuition that tags actually aren't that useful. They are sort of bolted on and ad hoc. And I mean, one really obvious problem with them is that if you use a tag in one place for one thing and then sort of misspell it elsewhere or use a slightly different tag in a different place, they won't know that they're the same thing. That's sort of also sort of a made up problem a little bit, but there are problems like that of it's sort of an infinite set of things. How do you know which of the infinite set of things to use? You have a whole new task just to apply the right tags at all of the right times, and that's a headache. So tags actually are useful, but in a more context-specific form, where maybe you have this really intensive project where there are a lot of different notes being used. You might use a very specific tag for a very short time to keep track of a lot of different things. Or maybe 4 different tags or something, but for a specific purpose at a specific time with a specific goal. The other thing that comes to mind too is that with Para, it's understood that there might be a special place to put certain things of a special type. Just the example, well, for you, maybe you're programming, and so you'd put your source code files in a particular place that your company has told you to put them, or you use this tool in this place to study them, to store them over time. That's still something you do with Para, that you keep those files in the right place for your company. You don't need to change that. You don't need to change other people's workflow to use this just because you start using this. This is really nice for, I use Google Drive quite a bit. My company's, the monastery's Google Drive is a total mess. But my Google Drive is nice and sanitary and hygienic because I use Para, and I can sort of keep my things in the right place, and other people can have a messy one if they want to. That's fine. I just get to have my nice clean desk, as it were, where I always know where things are. And that works for me. So again, you might still keep source code files in a particular place, and that's just going to be an ongoing thing to maintain those libraries. But then you'll see, if you learn a little bit more about the system, oh yes, there's a project right now that's implement this feature in that library, or there's an ongoing area with mentorship or something like that that has this responsibility this week. But and those things change over time as well. It's also dynamic. But for things that aren't special repositories or things like that, other things tend to fit quite nicely into this system.
And then specifically when you link through all of these things, you just actually try to find like a URL that you can link to. Like sometimes my thing is that I would find that things just don't belong to a certain place. So then how do I actually cross-reference them is a problem. If I want to cross-reference through in a single org file, I use internal links. It's somewhere on GitHub, but there's like no generic way to like reference a piece of information that might belong to in multiple hierarchies.
Yeah, right.
I guess you can make use of org attachment. So it's like it will create a drawer in your current header, and it will just keep on adding attachments. So you can attach links, files. So if you attach a file, probably it will just create a folder called data and copy it. Or if you can just reference a file somewhere, or you can basically just have a drawer of attachments. So for a given task, so you know like these are like list of attachments, so you can just jump anywhere you want. So it can create a graph for you since your task is more convoluted. It's among libraries, projects, and they link together. So probably attachment might work for you. Okay. So there's a video from Rainer on YouTube. So he has good videos on org mode. So yeah, so you can take a look at his series. It's like 24 or 25 videos, but 10 minutes each, and they teach a lot.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, moving things around, liberating, finding them.
Yeah,
useful.
finding them. Yeah. What was the use?
Workflow.
Rainer. So it's like org mode. If you search like org mode playlist on YouTube.
Okay, org mode playlist.
Yeah, so he's a guy from Germany.
Can you share the link on the meetup page?
Yeah. So what he suggests is like, so he has written some edits. So where he presses like F5 on any task, so that copies, creates an ID for the task and copies it, and he goes somewhere else and press like another function key, and then it will add it as an attachment. Or like, so he created some shortcuts and he has shared them. So yeah, and his series is very impressive. Yeah, just like yours is. So he just basically explains like what is a column view for 10 minutes, or what is org attachments, and yeah, like small org things, but 10 minutes each, and yeah, they're fun to work.
It's this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is or is not the same thing of what you're talking about, but I believe that there's a feature that lets you create unique IDs for specific headers.
So there's a function in org mode which will create all unique IDs for in a given file, and then you can use them somewhere else. So he just wrote some wrapper around it where he presses F5, which creates unique ID and copies them. So you can easily just paste it somewhere, and then you can reference it back. So even if you move to an archive and later you just want to find that, then you can use the unique ID. It will jump to the archive, yeah, and get it for you. So it will just create a graph for you by linking.
One of the limitations that Tasshin mentioned for org mode is the problem of capturing when you're on the go. And I was wondering if anyone, as you mentioned borg, I guess, and does anyone else have any novel solutions to this problem? Something I've wondered about myself. I got Orgsly on my Android phone, and I've never, practically speaking, tried to enter anything on it, but I don't know. No one has any. It's not a. We kind of need Emacs.
Mobile, we do something called mobile org.
Mobile org. Okay. Is that no more?
Faint memory of that.
Other thing I'd say about that, I mean, I think Orgsly, as far as I know, is like the state of the art on Android for this, but or like, you know, the equivalent of borg for Android. I haven't used it myself, but the other thing is that really when you have a system like this, you could use anything. Like you could use a Google Doc on your phone that you just know that you're going to review every day to move things over. That would work just as fine. I mean, we can look at it right now. My inbox is has 2 things on there, that I capture. I happen to capture those on Bjorg. Those do, it adds in the to-do marker and whatnot, but those are things that I captured on the go earlier today. But you could see, since it's just 2 things that I know I'm going to review tomorrow morning, that you could use a Google Doc or a what have you, anything would do if you have a system like this, where I'm going to review the inbox every day.
How did they end up in this inbox? Like from Bjorg, is there a Dropbox or just through Dropbox?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so Bjorg syncs with Dropbox, and there's some other solutions. There's I don't even know what they are, but there's more open solutions than Dropbox that you can use that Bjorg knows. And
like iCloud and even Google Drive, I guess, and for web, some DAV. And the cool feature of Bjorg is it syncs, it acts like a on the agenda. So on your phone, you get the reminders, which is really cool.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it will, and you can set remind me 10 minutes before. It respects the deadline and the schedule. Works well. Right. Yeah. I recall, I guess, John saying that he used to take voice notes, and at the end of
kind of notes?
Voice notes.
Oh.
I recall on Satya's blog,
Yeah.
you mentioned that for captioning, he uses voice notes, and at the end of the day, he just flushes those notes to the
Yeah, I don't even need to do that anymore now that voice transcription has gotten so good.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I just say something into my watch, which goes into iCloud, which ends up in org mode.
Oh, that's all.
Simple as just saying, remind me to blah, 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 and then it will be in org mode by the end of the day.
Wow. How exactly does that work? Wait, what's the word?
So there's an app for the iOS called Draft.
Okay.
You can set, if you create a reminder list called Drafts, Drafts will pull in reminders automatically from that.
Okay.
Then when you say to your watch, remind me to, you set your default reminder list to be Draft.
And then
Drafts upload stuff to your iCloud. And you can upload each item as its own file with a timestamp and the name. Then, in org mode on Emacs, because of the iCloud, you can see all the files accumulating in that folder, and then have a pre-agenda refresh hook that says, if there are files in that folder, start sucking them into the inbox category in the capture, the file that you use to capture all of your tasks. Pretty cool. Yeah, it works extremely well. If anything, you end up with too many tasks because it's so easy to do that by the end of the week, you've got 100 things that are unfiled. How much time do you find that you spend managing the system as opposed to doing the things the system is asking you to do?
Well, I try to keep good track of this, not in a, I don't clock it, but sort of have almost from the meditation perspective, like a subjective sense of it, strongly of not only how long it takes, but how it sort of feels emotionally, because I know that if it takes a long time and doesn't feel good emotionally, then it won't happen.
Right.
So I try to keep the daily reviews at about 10 minutes. Sometimes they'll take a little longer. Like the daily review today probably took me a couple of hours because I was coming out of retreat, and so there's a lot.
Yeah.
So I know that one's going to take a while, but usually it's about 10 minutes, 15 minutes. The weekly reviews, I try to keep at maximum 30 minutes. The monthly reviews they might take that long, but they tend to take more like 10 minutes. And then the annual review, that one's a good one to take a long time on, but also have a sort of emotional feel of being curious and interesting and fun and exciting, which makes the length of it feel fun. And it's infrequent, so it doesn't matter so much. But if the short ones are the risk is that the short ones won't be short and that they won't feel fun or easy, and they'll just feel like a chore. And if that happens, then the whole system starts to break down. So a big part of that is just doing them consistently, not only on the right rhythm, but at the right time, that there's sort of like a meaning to the rhythm and doing it. When you know you have a lot of new tasks, you know you need to do a daily review. So,
what time of day do you do the review?
I do it typically the first time in the day that I can use my computer and not be engaged in other tasks. So, you know, for me, that looks like until a certain time in the morning, I can't use my computer because I'm on the monastic schedule. And we're sort of in silent mode in the morning and evenings. And then after breakfast, we have a morning meeting. And so usually I don't do the daily review before then. I'll do it sometime after that as quickly as I can, but sometimes right after that, I'll need to do something. So, but I just know I'm going to get to that. There's just a sense I'm going to get to that. So, oh, and just this might be interesting to some people as a quick side note. I actually have a system that is even cooler than this that I use all in my head, which is for when I'm meditating. I will use very short-term memory palaces for storing my tasks so that there's a tendency to get distracted by the tasks when you're meditating. And so I have a memory palace that I'll just use and reset every day until I can capture things on my phone or on my computer again. And so it'll have like 2 or 3 or 4 vivid images in my memory palace that I'll just wipe clean the next day by the time, you know, once I've captured and filed
How
them.
the F does that work?
You have a blog post, a book.
Good question. I should probably write a blog post on the memory palaces thing. I actually have a blog post about writing to-do lists down, but since then I've changed to using memory palaces, which work much better. But thank you. I'll write a blog post.
John, I recall one other note from your talk in the podcast that you said like your capture works like magical, which is like when you do the org capture, you get the context if you're in Chrome or if you're in other Mac applications. So do you still have that somewhere on GitHub that we can make use of?
To a certain extent, I kind of do what he does with the rich capture templates that use a lot of escape codes. So if I'm in Emacs and I'm reading an email in GNUs, hitting the capture key will pull in who was the author, what's the link to the email, and what's the date that they wrote it. For web browsers, not so much anymore because they took away the ability to do that with Firefox. And they went to Quantum. You don't quite get the ability to see what the title of the current page you're looking at is anymore.
I mostly, for that, have a sort of more caveman type solution, which is, I mean, at a certain point I had many email inboxes that were all Gmail. Right now I'm down to 2, thank goodness. But I'll just grab the URL from the URL bar and then write, you know, so it'd be like, write email to John, and then, you know, I'd sort of add a link here and paste that. And that's sufficient for me. It's just to like have the link to it.
Yeah.
And then I can archive the email in Gmail and come back to it at the time that I've set up.
That's a great idea.
That's all I need is the link, and the links are unique in Gmail. So even if you've archived it, it's still the same link. And it works across, like Gmail has, you know, U0 for my, I use U0 for my personal and U1 for my work. And if you have more, it'll consistently, as long as you don't log out and you log in the right order, have the same number. So it works fine if you know how that works. Sort of a technical detail, but I'm also curious, just very quick question. Is anyone here familiar with Wardley maps? Okay. Just on a, I have some Wardley maps about my Emacs configuration, but I'll save them for people who might be listening to the talk and might be familiar with them. Anyway.
Can you clarify the difference between areas and resources going back to Para?
Yeah. Areas are ongoing areas of responsibility with standards to be maintained. So something like a job at work or a relationship or something. A resource is an interest. So something that you don't have any, you shouldn't have any tasks associated with it. It's just something that you're kind of curious about that might become a project or an area at some point, but for now it's just something that you're sort of curious about. Like maybe you got really interested in feminism and want to learn more about it, but your day job doesn't relate to feminism. You just want to know more about it. You read some articles about them, want to store them. Maybe 6 months down the line, you have a total career pivot. You decide to go all in on feminism, start a nonprofit devoted to it. Who knows? It could become a project or an area, but it's for things that are currently interests without tasks.
So I noticed at one point you used a Hydra, and I kind of recently discovered them. Did you have you been using them for a while? Do you have some custom things that you've made, or is it how easy or how hard was it transition to using it?
Yeah, I've been using them for a little while. I really like them for these custom key maps. It's really nice to have a review key map that I can just, pull this up and, this one, and it'll say, oh, those are the 3 ones. I think that might not be a Hydra, I'm not sure. I've forgotten, but.
I think that's which key?
Yeah, I just forget if I coded the thing under it as a Hydra or not, but I'm forgetting the details. But I do use Hydras, I like them. I don't tend to use the more advanced configuration versions of it with the colors and the doc strings and stuff like that. When I've made my own Hydras, I sort of use the simplest possible form. One thing that I found it useful for was clocking. I found the clocking feature to be sort of intimidating before I started using it, but then there was a point where I needed to use it for invoices, and so I wanted to track how much certain things kept, and so I had to start using clocking or as a built-in, easily available thing, and I'm, had this is a Hydra of clocking, and somehow just having one key to remember for clocking, and then I could go to this, made it less intimidating to me. I think now that I know how it works, and I could just go back to using it with whatever the keystrokes are for it, but I still like that. I mean, I just hit one key, and then, practically speaking, I only ever use the I and the O there of the in and out, but that's really nice. I like that. And actually, a thing that I did there was that, technically speaking, those commands are the normal versions, but there's also versions of clocking commands that are for agendas. And so I sort of re-implemented that functionality as a agenda Hydra. You can see that's a different Hydra. They actually run different commands under the hood, but so it was nice that it could just kind of work the same way because I set that up, even though they're different functions.
Textual content of your org buffers is quite beautiful. I like the way that you've laid out the fonts and the colors.
Thanks. Yeah, this is quite nice, actually. There's someone recently who, until recently, I was using Solarized Dark, which I liked, but also didn't look as beautiful as this, I think. But someone made a configuration for Spacemacs, actually, that looks sort of like this. And specifically, the thing that is that it's still like monospaced in the code ones, but then in the sort of org mode files, it's this more like rich, beautiful, I don't know how to describe that with fonts, maybe it's like serif or something, fonts that look a little bit prettier.
And the way you've made it such a bold black, I really like that.
Yeah, I almost entirely stole their configuration, so it's someone else's thing, although there was a bit of work that someone else, a third party did that wasn't the original person, to adapt it to a non-Spacemacs context. Yeah, I use that, and that's, I believe that's in my configuration as well, so you can, nice. Yeah, it's really beautiful. If you start using it, there's a few things that aren't looking so great to me, so if you figure out how to fix them, I'd love to hear that. Like the code block there is slightly to the left of the header, and it'd be nice if that was slightly to the right. Sort of, there's a couple of places where the indenting just looks a little strange to my eyes. It's like those quotes, why those should be indented further, not back.
Oh, I see.
But it's still heads and tails much better than even Solarized Dark, which I used until recently.
Yeah.
Can you scroll down a bit, please?
You can look at my configuration. What's that?
I'm just loving this, the fungus thing.
Yeah. What did you say, Grant?
Is there some configuration which exists for like the dark mode?
Oh, like this, but dark mode?
Yeah.
Not that I know of. I'm not really a huge fan of dark mode, but
So this Spacemax in dark mode looks like this.
No, I already have this. I'm more interested in the code blocks and.
But you're not using the
So
EP
this is
Bembo
in,
font in this one.
No, this one is in terminal.
Wait, so do you have a code block somewhere?
So you can open one.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't actually know that there is, but you could probably make one. This is still kind of new. I'm sure it'll improve. People, maybe this will become a theme or a package or something. It's sort of hacky right now, but that's the way Emacs works. That's actually why I mentioned the wordly maps, because the thing that's really interesting to me about all of this on a higher level is when I meet someone, I'm not going to try to convince them to use Emacs or org mode, or I wouldn't talk about almost any of the things that I talked about tonight, with just someone random that I met. However, I do think people would benefit from using building a second brain, so I might talk about that. But the thing that's interesting about combining these two topics is that Emacs, as a highly customizable interface, allows me to experiment with what it will look like in a few years when more people have building a second brain. So there's been this thing with GTD where GTD has been around for several decades. It's well understood. If you use a task manager, any task manager on the market, it will in some shape or form have been influenced by GTD, where it's like, oh, this is just how it works. It's sort of built into the conceptual framework for all of the tools. Building a second brain is so new, it's just a few years old now, that we're not at that point where it's well understood, oh, what is para, oh, what is progressive summarization. But there are really cool things that will be possible when more people know about it and it's baked into the tools. Progressive summarization, which I didn't talk about at all, is going to be so cool when we hit that level. People have, like, Kindle highlights are the simplest form of this, but it's going to get so much cooler when your computer understands what you're trying to do with your note. But because Emacs is super customizable, I can experiment now with what it'll look like 5-10 years from now when the tools understand what a project is in a sort of semantic way, or when they understand what a note is in a semantic way. They don't right now. So that's why people have these really cool tools that don't work that well or are really disorganized, because there's not a good conceptual framework for what the things are. So wait 5 or 10 years and the things that I showed you tonight will not be in Emacs, but they'll be available to everyone.
Could you actually speak a little bit more about progressive summarization?
Yeah, this is, I'll just show you a random note. This is a note that I'm really excited about by my friend Miles Bouquet. He's trained with me at the monastery. And he wrote this paper for his dissertation at UPenn on positive psychology about monasteries of the future. This is an incredible paper. If you're interested in the work I'm doing, this is a really cool way to learn about it. And it's also an 80-page paper. So I doubt any of you are actually going to read it. However, I took progressively summarized notes on it, which you see here. So you, if you understood this format of progressive summarization, could very quickly read this note and get the sense of it. So what does that look like? It, at the first level, looks like having excerpts from the text, things that I found interesting from this 80-page document. Then there's a second layer, which is things being bolded. There's a third layer, which is things being highlighted. There are actually a fourth and fifth layers past that. The fourth layer is to write a summary at the top. In this case, it's the abstract, which most papers already provide, but if there wasn't an abstract.
You link back to where you origined that idea from the 80-page document?
You could certainly do that with things like Kindles. It does that by default with, saying what the location it was from is. I actually don't really like that or find it useful. It's sort of, there's often the case, I find this with people that are programmers or other things like that, where because a thing is possible, they will do it. But if you look at what's actually useful, that might not actually,
reading this and I saw a moment of great promise can lead us instead toward chaos and ruin, I might wonder, what was it that birthed that idea? And then that might go to 5 pages.
Totally. Yeah, and that...
Because if you had that, then you kind of recaptured what Project Xanadu was all about with their progressive hypertext.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of what this is going towards as well, and what it'll look like when your tools understand that like you could go to the original source if it was available. In this case, practically what you do is sort of, this is pretty common practice right now in people's using this. This comes from a PDF document, so I put that at the bottom, and so you would go and search for the thing. It's more common that you would want to review the note for its own context than that you would go to the original thing. Sort of 90% of the time, you'll just want to look at the note, and then 10% of the time, of course, you'll want to go back to the source. And so that's it. You would know how to do that. You would search in the PDF. And of course, at some point, tools will become available that would let you do that. I'm excited about that. But in the meantime, this is sort of good enough. And since I understand this format, what this looks like, even if I hadn't taken this note, I could very quickly look at this and get a sense of it. Oh, this is what this is about. And then if I wanted to, I could go in more depth. Oh, this is really interesting to me. It's related to what I'm excited about, relevant to my projects and goals. So I'm going to spend more time reading this, consuming it, processing it. So you don't have to just stick to the highlighted levels, but it's sort of a very quick way in. Oh, the science isn't bad, it's young. So here, Dave Vago is talking about meditation science. It's not bad, it's just young. That's a really good quote that I personally really wanted to remember, that like, it's still really, really early days for the science of meditation, but things are gonna get better. Anyway, I think we've probably overstayed our welcome. No, we're good? Okay, don't wanna.
I'm just curious, because I have a pedagogical interest maybe, how did you stumble across Emacs? And have you used any other language than ELISP?
Yep. I'll answer the second question first. I've used Clojure quite a bit, and Clojure script as well, and then played with a handful of other languages, Python and Go and Ruby and this and that. I like the Lisps quite a bit. That's why I got really into Clojure. I got into it, I had a liberal arts degree, and then I went to Asia for about 8 months after I graduated, and my best friend studied computer science and has been an engineer at a few places, including Twitter, and we were traveling through Asia together, and I wanted to take that opportunity to learn about programming from him, but not in a way where like I was going to go and make it my job. I just was really curious about it, and so I was using Linux full-time on a netbook that I was carrying around, and I was using Arch Linux, and so there was a lot of configuration of text files for that, of like, this is how this works and that works. And my friend I converted him. He used Vim, and I sort of got around with that, but it didn't really make sense to me conceptually. And then I was like, oh, heck, I'll try the other thing, Emacs, and it made a lot more sense and was a lot of fun. And so I just kept going with it, and it's sort of a hobby for me now. It's a fun thing for me to tinker with. And I learned programming through it. It's just so easy to learn programming through Emacs in a weird way. I mean, obviously there's a huge barrier to entry, but if you get over the barrier, you can inspect all the variables or the functions in a really easy way that just sort of clicked with my brain. I had tried to learn PHP and I think Python in high school, and And it's just like, oh, this doesn't make any sense to me. But with Lisps, it sort of clicked, and having an environment that made it easy to sort of see how things work. And as I said, the first Lisp that I wrote was capture templates. Like, it's just super simple code, but it was immediately useful to me. And then I saw how I could make it a little bit more complicated and a little bit more complicated, and get to do things that were cooler and cooler. And I liked that a lot.
Are we out of questions? Looks like we might be. Well, this was an amazing presentation. Thank you so much for coming and giving it to us.